of course, of our extraordinary chairman and CEO, Channels Media Group. Also our partners, London School of Economics, and of course, Feroz Lalji Institute, and we have our patron who's joined as well. We'll also be welcoming outstanding guests who are on this call to the official launch of the Climb. But just, to begin, this event is particularly important because we are launching the Climb podcast and we are having a dialogue. It's about a critical new instrument for the African youth telling their remarkable stories, but I won't unveil everything just yet. Let's hear from, of course, the head digital, Channels Television, a few words as we open the launch. Thank you, everyone. Simon Ejembi is the head digital with Channels Television.
Thank you, Millicent. Good afternoon, the chairman, Channels Media Group, Dr. John Momoh, director of the Feroz Lalji Institute for Africa at the London School of Economics and Political Science, Professor Tim Allen. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to welcome you all to this special event, which is the launch of the Climb podcast, a first of its kind podcast collaboration between a leading media organization in Africa and a leading international academic institution. This podcast collaboration between the Channels Media Group and the Feroz Lalji Institute for Africa at the London School of Economics and Political Science is a significant step forward for digital journalism in Africa. And it fits perfectly into the Channels Media Group's vision to be the voice of Africa, and by so doing, tell inspiring African stories, unusual stories, documenting and preserving African history and breakthrough. This podcast is another step forward in ensuring that we do not only tell stories that must be told, but we tell them in every format available, making sure everyone is as informed as they should be. Having successfully created award-winning content across multiple platforms, achieving many firsts in the process, we are now venturing fully into podcast production. I would like to use this opportunity to thank the amazing team at the Feroz Lalji Institute for Africa and the wonderful team here at the Channels Media Group for working relentlessly to make this collaboration a reality. Special appreciation goes to the chairman of the Channels Media Group, Dr. John Momoh, and the vice chairman, Channels Media Group, Dr. Shola Momoh, for saying yes to every one of our requests and using every opportunity to spur us on. To the ever calm Mr. Tosin Adebisi, who is Senior Program Officer at the FLIA LSC, and the director of the Institute, Professor Tim Allen, thank you for making it easy to get this off the ground. It is a collaboration we are all proud of and the start of more great production. I would like to specially thank the guest speakers here today for graciously accepting our invitation despite tight schedules and conflicting time zones. This launch event would not have been possible without your presence. Our keynote speaker, Professor Martin Spinelli of the University of Sussex, Mr. Feroz Lalji, who is the patron of the Feroz Lalji, named after him, Institute for Africa at the London School of Economics and Political Science, Adetomi Soyinka of the British Council, and African Youth Envoy Chido Mpemba. Thank you for honoring our invite. Once again, I welcome you to this launch event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That's Simon Ejembi, head digital with Channels Television. Thanks for that heartwarming and welcoming speech. Just another reminder, because I know a number of people have joined us on this call. This is being streamed live. It's a live session of the launch of the podcast, the collaboration with the Feroz Lalji Institute, London School of Economics, and Channels Media Group, Channels Television. A reminder that we've been joined on this call, our Professor Martin Spinelli, who is our keynote speaker. We'll be introducing him very shortly. Of course, we have Chido Patron Pemba, and also Professor Tim Allen, and of course the patron, FLIA LSC, Mr. Feroz Lalji, Dr. John Momoh, Chairman, CEO, Channels Media Group, is also here on the call. Tosin Adebisi, Senior Program Manager with FLIA LSC as well. And of course, the vice chairman, Channels Media Group. I did see her picture at some point. Yes. Welcome, everyone. Welcome once again. So for the next step, let's head to the podcast overview. And this is coming from the presenter and producer of the Client Podcast, Joel Atedo-Bright. He is the producer, also presenter, and also Kadidatu Sise, who is the co-host. Joel, I'll let you take this from here.
I hope you can all hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me join Taiwan to most cordially welcome you all to this historical. My name is Joel Atedo-Bright. I am the podcast producer of the channel. I am also the editor for the Client Podcast. As we gather here today, the first episode of the Client Podcast, titled John's Story, is being published across all podcast sharing platforms in the world. John's Story, our first episode, is a riveting story of a 16-year-old boy from humble Nigerian whose immense dedication and passion for tech has catapulted him beyond the shores of Nigeria and the African continent to become an internationally celebrated child genius. Now, despite the great odds he faced, ranging from the inability of his parents to buy him a laptop to his inability to pay to acquire the skills needed to fuel his passion, he still prevailed. And today, as a fast-rising 18,
Sorry, I'm having some network challenges. Can you hear me now?
Go ahead.
I totally apologize. So sorry. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, I wanted to join Simon to most cordially welcome you all to today's historical launch event. I'm so sorry for the audio mix-up. So my name is Joel Atedo-Bright. I am the podcast producer here at Channels. I am also the editor and the co-host for the Client Podcast. Now, as we gather here today, the first episode of the Client Podcast, titled John's Story, is being published across all podcast sharing platforms in the world. John's Story, our first episode, is the riveting story of a 16-year-old boy from humble Nigerian beginnings, whose immense dedication and passion for tech has catapulted him beyond the shores of Nigeria and beyond the African continent to become an internationally celebrated child genius. Now, despite the great odds he faced, ranging from the inability of his parents to buy a laptop to his inability to pay to acquire the skills he needed to fuel his passion, he still prevailed. And today, as a fast-rising 17-year-old tech entrepreneur, he has made it his mission to buy laptops for other young Nigerians to help them pursue their own tech dreams. Now, I am immensely proud to have worked on the story of John, and it was a truly inspiring experience. His story, and more like his, are the kinds of stories the Client Podcast will set out to tell. Real stories of African youths that foreground their mind-blowing achievements, as well as some of the major challenges they face as they strive to grow and develop themselves, their respective countries, and the continent as a whole. It is my hope that the themes and subtle messages from this podcast filters through to relevant authorities across Africa, alerting them to the immense potentials of the youths and the need to create an enabling environment where the youths can thrive. By featuring stories of African youths in the podcast, this podcast will also seek to encourage more young Africans abroad to contribute their skills and knowledge to finding lasting solutions to some of the major challenges facing the continent. Now, by far, Africa has the most young people of anywhere on Earth, and these young people hold the key to unlocking the continent's future. But with every university admission season in Europe and America, the continent loses some of these youths who in most cases never intend to return. Our podcast will strive to encourage more African youth in the diaspora to engage with the continent. We will do our bit to stem the continent's alarming brain drain crisis. Over the next 12 months, episodes of the Client Podcast will be dropping once every 2 weeks, And by this time in 2024, we would have completed our first season. Starting with the story of John, which I hope you will all listen to immediately after this launch. I hope you all enjoy listening to our upcoming 23 episodes. Listen to the stories, enjoy them, and take away with you the awareness that it is time to raise the voices of Africa's youth and place it in its rightful place, which is at the heart of the continent's growth and development discourse. Once again, thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joel Attedo-Bright, podcast producer, for that wonderful opening. You know, still buttressing all the things we will be looking forward to with the podcast, the Climb podcast. I also like to say that, yes, we also have joining us on the score, the AGMO, Mr. Oranta. I didn't mention you initially. Thank you. Welcome. Who's with us here at Channels Television. And then I think I see you now, Chido Mpemba. Yes, welcome. Thank you very much. All right, so perhaps keywords we should have in our thoughts while we're here: youth leadership, innovation, development, of course, Africans in diaspora. This is really celebrating the achievement. There's really a lot to look forward to. Sometimes I wish if I can still fall under that bracket of youth, because this is, a very lovely initiative. To someone that has extraordinary experience with what we're doing, and that is this launch, extraordinary background, extensive work with podcasts, extensive study as well. That's our next guest, next speaker, Professor Martin Spinelli, who's a professor in podcasting, Creative Media, University of Sussex. Let's hear from you. Welcome.
Screen, if that's all right. So can you set it up so that I can do that? How are we doing?
I believe you should have access now.
Great. Yeah, I can do it. So, right. Can everybody see me and the big slide? I think so. Okay, we'll proceed. So thank you very much, Millicent. Thank you very much, Jewel. I am Professor Martin Spinelli. I'm a professor of podcasting at the University of Sussex, the first professor of podcasting in the UK. I'm also the executive producer and director of The Res, which is a kids podcast, a top 20 podcast in the US and the UK. And I am an author and an editor on lots of research in and around podcasting. And today I'm going to be speaking about story-shaped podcasts and the climb. Congratulations are definitely in order to Jewel and Khadijatu and everyone involved in making this day possible and getting to this point. This is a huge achievement. A lot of work has obviously gone in, and I'm very, very pleased this day has come, and even more pleased to be a part of it. A little bit about how I came to be invited to speak here today. I met Jewel in 2020 while he was doing our MA in media practice for development and social change at the University of Sussex. And he was commenting in his own remarks about the African brain drain. Jewel could have certainly stayed in Britain and really made a blazing career for himself in the media, but he chose to go back to Nigeria and do this great and really, really worthy and engaging project. As soon as I met him, I was immediately struck by his commitment, his hard work, his lateral thinking, his determination, and a healthy amount of just raw talent. And I'm not surprised that with his input, the climb has come together as it did. While we were at Sussex together, Jewel was on the inaugural team of the podcast Borderscapes, which delivered stories about crossing lines and crossing boundaries, geopolitical boundaries, interpersonal boundaries, material and metaphysical boundaries. And his episode was really a standout in that first series, and we've been using it as a model ever since. Now a little bit about my interest in podcasting and my entry into it, to the extent that it's relevant to us here today talking about the climb. I had my first paying gig in radio when I was 19 years old, which was well before podcasting was a thing. I was working for a national public radio station in the US, and I did projects for NPR. And then when I moved to Britain, did projects for the BBC. And I knew about podcasting from when the term was first coined in 2004, when it was quite a geeky thing, the domain of early tech adopters. So early on, podcasting was on my radar, but it really was on my radar as a kind of curiosity until 2014. In the autumn of 2014, I was at Reuters International headquarters in London for an awards ceremony. I was at the ceremony with another one of my students who was up for an award. And before the event started, I was bouncing around from table to table in the lobby, asking people, young people, what they were listening to. And at every table I stopped at, they were effusing about this podcast Serial, which I just launched. Everybody was saying, oh, it's so captivating. It's so thrilling. It's such a good story. Sarah Koenig, the host, is really, really amazing at what she does. I want more of this, and I want to do stuff like this. So I was intrigued. And the next day in the morning, I downloaded the first episode of Serial, thinking I would try it out. And as soon as that first episode was over, I downloaded all of the rest and binged listened. It was remarkable. Serial was hugely successful, widely covered in the media, and became something of a pop cultural phenomenon very, very quickly. Some people, particularly at the time, argued that it became the hit that it became for technological reasons and for media ecosystem reasons. But it's fairly clear to me that while the technology and the promotion might have got listeners to that first episode, the quality of the story being told was the thing that made people wanted to binge listen. And at that moment, at that Serial moment in 2014, I knew something had properly shifted in our audio world. I saw podcasting had achieved a kind of critical mass, and I decided there were real lessons to be learned from Serial for audio makers of all kinds, and that scholars really needed to start taking podcasting seriously. So I invited one of my colleagues at a nearby university, Lance Dan, at the University of Brighton, who has since become my steady research partner and production partner, to start pulling together material from our own projects with some fresh data and with interviews with leading podcasters from around the world working at this Serial moment. And we produced the first substantial critical book-length monograph about podcasting and its unique characteristics and its unique potentials, which we framed as distinct and different from radio, and in fact, from all other media that came before it. Among our findings, particularly relevant to the climb, was that youth are driving the interest in podcasting, both the making of it and listening to it. And that the podcasts that are the most memorable, have the most longevity, and make the highest impact are the ones that are most committed to a story shape, the ones that are most committed to narrative. These kinds of podcasts are obviously very different from the vast majority of podcasts, which are less structured chat casts. Story-shaped podcasts, on the other hand, while they take more time to realize, are the ones that stay with people longer. They get written about more. They're the ones with episodes that withstand the test of time. So some history briefly about this kind of podcasting. In the English-speaking world, the story-shaped podcast really has its roots in the radio program This American Life, which is produced at WBEZ in Chicago under the direction of Ira Glass. And in fact, Serial, the podcast we were talking about a couple of slides ago, was a spin-off of This American Life. And they imported many of the narrative lessons that they had learned and perfected over the years in working on This American Life when they launched Serial. And it went on to win. This American Life has won numerous very prestigious awards. Radiolab is another very early entrant into this sphere of podcasting and enter in a very influential way. It has a very strong commitment to story shaping and particularly using human stories and experiences to make very complicated scientific material accessible. It's been produced by WNYC as a podcast since 2004, since the early days of podcasting. And on this slide, you'll see two quotes from the two main people involved in Radiolab's creation, which point to shaping stories without making it obvious that you're shaping stories. It's a real trick. So Ellen Horn, who was initially the executive producer of Radiolab, says, "I always want a podcast to have character, plot, ideas. I'm very attached to story because I think that's how our minds work. You have to construct meaning to make sense of all the chaos." And Jad Abumrad, the co-host and creator, says, "Writing is the enemy," which is very interesting. And here we see Radiolab managing a balancing act between story shaping and conversational energy. And they do this on Radiolab through an iterative process of lots and lots of recording sessions spread out over weeks and months, which are then stitched together to create some of the most finely crafted audio experiences that I know of, particularly in those early seasons. Most of the well-known producers who work in story-shaped podcasts like these often try to use the quest as the model for their stories, because this is the type of story that is the most prevalent in human history, according to Joseph Campbell, who spent 2 decades in the early 20th century researching religions, folklore, mythology, written in graphic form from around the world across all of human history. On the left of this slide, there's a graphic from his quest journey, from his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And decades later, in the 70s and 80s and 90s, his work of history and comparative literature and comparative religion was adopted into several how-to books, how-to formats by people like Christopher Vogler in his book, The Writer's Journey, and the graphic on the right is from that book. And models like these are also used in most popular films. They first began in Star Wars. They're with us today through Marvel films. They are really the sort of bedrock of storytelling now. All of this is by way of saying very simply that story architecture is virtually built into our human DNA. For whatever reasons, for cultural reasons, for biological reasons, story is how we make sense of the world and our relationships in the world. And the best podcasters are very aware of this and make use of it. So from the origins of story-shaped podcasts to the origins of The Climb. When I met Jewel, we started working together in 2020 at the University of Sussex. It was on the podcast Borderscapes. The tagline for Borderscapes was then stories about crossing lines, changing states, and blurring boundaries for young adults from around the world. You can find this series on Spotify, and in the 3 years that Borderscapes has run, we've had episodes about the stress of crossing American immigration on a Rwandan passport, intimate sexual relationships mediated by a screen, the impact of Brexit on the British music industry, the controversy around using video replays to determine offsides calls in professional football, and Jules' fantastic episode called The Story of Light about a scholarship that was interrupted by the pandemic. And I run the classes in that module like I would run any professional production meeting, with different teams working on graphics, the website, distribution, promotions, etc. And everybody producing their own story-shaped episode, which applies the lessons about narrative that were part of the lectures built into the module. The project is designed as good training for doing a next bigger, better project early on in my students' careers. So I want to shift now specifically to the African context of the climb by just turning to some data. There have recently been some very, very thorough and broad-ranging studies of the demographics of African podcast listeners and their media habits. The key demographic takeaways are that podcast listeners in Africa are younger, mostly female, more highly educated, more urban, and have more disposable income. Obviously, this is a very attractive demographic, a very attractive set of people for advertisers. But for its female majority listenership, this picture mirrors podcast listening demographics in the US and in Europe. And the fact that podcast listeners are mostly female in Africa, some people have speculated, is perhaps because very often podcast production speaks to and for marginalized groups in a way that mainstream media often does not. And this is because barriers to podcast entry are much lower and more people can get involved. There's massive growth happening right now in this area. I don't want to read all the stats on this slide, but here are some important takeaways. So smartphone uptake on average, already higher than in some European countries, is increasing rapidly throughout Africa. Consumer spending on media and entertainment is rising. Mobile internet use is rising very rapidly. And unlike other parts of the world, media consumption is a more social activity than it is a privatized one. These figures are even more remarkable, I think, when you consider that we're talking about economies where the cost of mobile phone data is often 4 times what it is in the US. So in short, I think this is a great, great time to start projects like The Climb. There are also extremely robust podcast communities and networks in Africa, Africa Podfest being the one that I came across the most when I was preparing for this keynote. I've used their infographics from their recent Discovery Tour report on the previous 2 slides. This report shows African podcasters not simply as playing catch up to American and European podcasters, but trailblazing in many important areas. And one of the most interesting for me is how far ahead of the game globally independent African podcasters are with innovative grassroots ways for funding podcast productions, often by activating pre-existing communities and pre-existing networks. So now let's turn to The Climb in some detail. I learned from conversations not that long ago with Jewel that, ironically, on the world's youngest continent, youth voices are still notably absent from most mainstream media. The Climb is a platform that is taking some steps to redress that balance. And in terms of production, alternate episodes are being produced at LSE in London and channels in Nigeria, with episodes dropping every fortnight. At the moment, Jewel and Khadijatu are going out and finding impressive young leaders in Africa with stories to tell, and their hope is that after The Climb develops its own momentum, people with good stories to tell will come to them instead. So the first episode drops today, featuring John Oseni. Please listen wherever you get your podcasts. I listened earlier in the week to a pre-drop version that Jewel sent me, and listened again this morning on Apple Podcasts. It is fantastic. It tells the remarkable story of a stunningly clever 17-year-old Nigerian programmer and tech entrepreneur, pulling himself up from very humble beginnings to employ a lot of people and bring a lot of money into his community. And it's written, recorded, mixed, and produced with real skill and care. And I'm sure the series will win some awards if you put it up for some, and I encourage you to do that. The final topic that seems absolutely right to bring up as we're talking about young people claiming a seat at the table and more presence in the media ecosystem is podcasting as a tool for social and cultural change. As I'm sure many of you know, by and large, there are very few gatekeepers in the podcast world, in the podcast space, very few obstacles, very few mechanisms of control. And while obviously this has led to some really problematic outbursts of misinformation recently, historically, it's meant that podcasting has been a real fulcrum for change in lots of communities around the globe. And with that in mind, I want to draw your attention briefly to Podium.me, which is a youth podcasting initiative born in the wake of the London riots of 2011. Podium.me is an organization that Jewel interned at while he was doing his MA here in Britain. And its philosophy is very, very much in sync with the philosophy of the Climb. So in the wake of the riots, the consistent mainstream media narrative was one of dangerous ethnic minority urban youth committing acts of senseless vandalism simply because they wanted to. And that's the picture on the left. That was the common framing of it. This, however, was not at all the experience of the founders of Podium.me, who lived in one of the affected parts of London, where they were a part of broom armies sprouting up, and that's the picture on the left, with a huge number of ethnic minority urban youth cleaning up the city in the aftermath. Podium.me was born to try and provide an alternative to some of those deeply problematic mainstream media narratives, and to create a space and a platform for young people to tell their own stories in their own way. And you can see the similarities to the Climb. Podium.me now has a broad global network of journalists, all under the age of 25, that Podium has helped train and who deliver Podium podcast stories every week. And it's changing the way young people are represented. My last point, and it's beyond the scope of African podcasts and story-shaped podcasts, but I bring it up because Jewel specifically asked me to talk about this, is about podcasting and podcasting and development. Because of their flexibility, their speed, their economy, and their relative ease of production, and their access on ubiquitous smartphones, I wanted to emphasize as a last note the utility of podcasting and development, particularly in conflict zones and post-conflict zones where people are working to rebuild. So these images that you can see on the slide are from a podcast project called Agricultural Voices Syria that I undertook with a colleague of mine in the business school at the University of Sussex to help address the UN Sustainable Development Goal of food security. Because of massive internal migration in Syria and the collapse of agricultural support services and the degradation of conventional broadcasting outlets, radio and TV, caused by the ongoing war, food insecurity and sustainable farming have been huge issues in northwest Syria in recent years. So to help meet some of those challenges, we set up AVS, Agricultural Voices Syria, where we equipped and trained expat Syrian agronomists, agricultural engineers, who are living across the border in Turkey. We equipped them to produce a podcast series aimed at farmers in northwest Syria with information on farming practices, livestock rearing, irrigation, and efficient and sustainable crop management techniques. We used a network of promoters on the ground in Syria to spread the word about this podcast and to show farmers how to access it. Several months after, the same people on the ground conducted a huge survey of our listeners for us with some very, very valuable data about their listening, what they felt about the series, and their broader media use. So interestingly for them, and a really kind of key and important thing to be thinking about as we're talking about new podcasts in this space, is for these farmers, AVS was the first podcast they ever listened to. We were the first in, which is obviously really important. This model can be, and we're in the process of trialing it in other areas, replicated in other conflict zones with very, very small investment. In this case, podcasting was simply a vehicle for knowledge exchange. We took Syrian experts with Syrian knowledge and we put them into contact with thousands of other Syrians who needed their expertise through podcasting. And as you can see suggested in this example, podcasting is an incredibly great tool for NGOs engaged in this kind of work or similar work, particularly because it's new, it's an emergent medium, you can get there first. And it's something that allows NGOs to do a bunch of important things. First, it allows them to publicly articulate priorities and define the terms of debates, which is very important. It allows them to build and strengthen communities. Because metrics are built into the way podcasts work and function, it allows easy evidence to be produced, evidence of work to funders and donors, and it creates a really lovely conduit for all stakeholders to communicate with each other. So the future of the climb is as bright as we all make it. I hope you'll all listen to it and spread the word about how great an undertaking it is. I hope Channels and LSE will put the climb up for lots of awards because I think it's a winner. And I hope the climb has the bigger desired effect of getting the stories of young people into the ears of lots of people around the world, and that it's a part of young people claiming seats at important tables around Africa and around the world. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Wish I could say a round of applause. Thanks so much. Lovely, your thoughts, comments, and the enthusiasm to this project, and the fact that you're already saying that it will win awards. I'm sure that everyone, the partners, are really looking forward to this. Thank you so much, Professor Martin Spinelli, the Professor in Podcasting, Creative Media, University of Sussex. Thanks so much again. I mean, I was thinking of so many things because somewhat I started going offline and coming back on, going off, coming back on, which is something that we see happen here. So one question I would be asking, and this is to Dr. John Momoh, and perhaps Joel, is, because this is going to be a digital platform to a large extent. So how are we going to maintain and get the podcast to the people that can afford the internet, who can easily access this podcast and then spread it far and wide in Africa and, of course, the rest of the world? So a question for you to know about. But I particularly want to bring in Chido Cleopatra Pemba, African Union Youth Envoy, and this is because you are a voice for young people. What do you think about this? We've heard from Mr. Jembe. We've also heard about what Ted O'Brien talked about for the climb, and Professor Spinelli. What do you think this platform for young people can achieve?
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, if you may allow me to speak on a Radio Observe protocol, and just to thank you for inviting me to join this launch, and to congratulate the Firoz Laji Institute for Africa as well as Channels for the launch. I'm ready as the Officer Youth Envoy. We're looking forward to work very closely with you and see how we can support, as well as mobilizing our young Africans within the continent and in the diaspora to really drive the narrative of Africa coming from the voices of the youth. If the internet has taught us one thing, I believe it's that everyone has a story to tell, and we love to share our stories. And I believe that podcasts are a rare point of growth in the current media landscape. They're valued for their convenience, their intimacy, as well as the choice. And just talking more about the demographic that I represent. I think we've heard it so many times that, more than 60% of Africa's population is under the age of 25. And by 2030, young Africans are expected to constitute 42% of the global youth. And, whilst this might seem like a challenge for future policymakers, with a greater need for food security, affordable healthcare, we spoke about agriculture, and various issues that we're faced with on the continent, I believe is a tremendous opportunity for young people to take a leading role in their future by creating the Africa that they want, according to Agenda 2063. And specifically, if we put it in the context of a podcast, I believe that this creates a platform where young people can be able to share their stories, can be able to share in terms of specifically when we speak about extraordinary stories. I mean, when I looked at the launch of this program, the program for this launch just spoke about extraordinary stories for African youth. And what does it really mean when you say extraordinary? To me, when we say extraordinary, it speaks about stories of resilience, stories of hope, stories of success, stories of challenges, but never giving up. And that's what truly resembles our African youth, which truly also reflects Agenda 2063 Aspiration 6. So I put it into that context. When you speak about Agenda 2063 Aspiration 6, it talks about an Africa whose development shall rely on the potential of its people, especially its women and its youth. And we might wonder why our youth, besides them being the largest demographic. But I believe that there's so much innovation that young people bring onto the table, and there's so much that they can share on various topics. And I believe that we need more young people getting involved, even when it comes to media and podcasting too across Africa. So this is truly, truly inspiring, really. And, I believe that it would also help to showcase the innovative strides of our African youth towards the growth of our continent. Again, whilst also targeting head on the Africa's brain drain issue by engaging young Africans in the diaspora about various ways we can, deploy the skills as mentioned in the objectives. So really, just in short and in summary, I believe that this is very, very exciting. We heard the statistics when it comes to, young people that are really engaged and, when it comes to podcasting. And this is definitely a platform, and an avenue, that we will get a lot of young people involved. But not only so, but I believe that it can also be used as a reference for policy making too. For policymakers, this is something that can be referenced when you look at stories that young people have to tell, when you look at challenges that young people are faced with, and what they recommend to policymakers, and coming in with that innovation as young people that, we can always reference to say a policy needs to be changed. And according to what we heard in the podcast on this series, this is what we believe as young people. So just in summary, congratulations, really looking forward, to what's to come with the Climb podcast, and looking forward on behalf of the African Union too, to support and to mobilize our young people across the continent to take part and parcel on this initiative. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Studio Cleopatra and Pemba as the African Youth Union Youth Envoy. Thanks a lot. Lots of excitement there as well. Another institute with a vision for Africa and Africa's young is, of course, Firoz Lalji Institute for Africa. Professor Tim Allen, if I can call upon you to just make a few remarks.
Thanks very much. Well, it's very exciting to hear about all these developments. They've been some time in the planning, as already been indicated. We're very much on board with this, and we think it's a tremendous way to be able to communicate to a much kind of wider audience the kinds of things we've been engaged with. The Firoz Lalji Institute builds on a long relationship between my institution, the London School of Economics, and the African continent. Many African heads of state have been trained at the LSE, and the connection between the institution and Africa is very strong, and is getting much stronger. Actually, largely because of the tremendous generosity of Firoz Lalji, who's also with us today. It's been his inspiring leadership, actually, of what we've been doing has really helped shape my institution in new ways, and this initiative is part of that. And we're very excited about what's happening, and we look forward to collaborating moving forward. I should say that I have a background in media myself. I did a lot of work for the BBC over many years, and the BBC has had considerable outreach in Africa, but this kind of podcasting creates a whole sort of new arena for communication, and engaging young people themselves in the production of podcasts, and that kind of collaborative production seems to me a really important aspect of this initiative, and one that we are very enthusiastic about. So many thanks for having me, and I really look forward to what comes out of the initiative moving forward.
Thank you, Professor Tim Allen, Director with the Feroz Lalji Institute for Africa and London School of Economics. Thanks a lot. I think we should hear from the man himself, the man, Feroz Lalji. Thank you, patron, Feroz Lalji Institute for Africa at London School of Economics. Thank you so much for taking time to join us in person. Thank you. How does the climb fit into your vision?
It is my pleasure. Good day, everybody. I'm Feroz Lalji. I'm the CEO of Zones IT Solutions. It's a global provider of IT solutions to corporations, public sector, and healthcare. I was born in Uganda, and I made my way to London School of Economics, and I graduated from there, and I reside in the United States now. But I'm very involved with Africa and the London School of Economics, as you can see. And I'm very pleased to be here for the launch of Climb Podcast and a collaboration between Channels TV and LSE. I got a very good education from Professor Pinelli, on podcasting. I really never understood the power of podcasting and how powerful it can be for the youths of Africa. So I'm very excited, on this venture. I have to say, when the Africa Institute was endowed, I had no idea how much it would scale, thanks to Professor Tim Allen and the team that supports FLIA. They have done an amazing job, scaling the Institute at the London School of Economics. Building on our program for African leadership, PFAL, which is part of Feroz Lalji Institute for Africa, LSE is proud to embark on this pioneering co-production with some of the extraordinary young Africans to inspire generations of future leaders. LSE has had a legacy of creating African leaders that include 6 presidents and numerous leaders in various forms of government and institutions. And our goal in PFAL is to create a new generation of African leaders that will impact social, economic, and political development of Africa. Climb Podcast will reach millions of people in Africa and around the world in a diaspora. This is a great opportunity for the youths of Africa to tell their stories and issues that concern them. I'm delighted to see this great initiative between LSE and Channels TV, and my congratulations to Mr. John Momoh for driving this initiative. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you so much, Feroz Lalji, patron, FLIA, LSE. Thank you so much for those comments. And you just called him, and that's the next person we're calling to give his remarks. One of the, or should I say, the change makers in the broadcast industry. Dr. John Momoh, your remarks as to this epoch-making occasion.
Sure.
Okay, Dr. Momoh, you might have to unmute, please.
There we go. Thank you very much.
Welcome, sir.
We forget to unmute. This is one thing that happens from time to time. Indeed, I'd like to recognize and acknowledge the presence of the founder of the Feroz Lalji Institute, Feroz Lalji himself, Professor Spinelli, our keynote speaker, Professor Tim Allen, for the incredible work you've been doing along with the other members, Chido, Joel, Ejembi, Kingston United, Uranta, and the Channels team. It's indeed my pleasure to be here today and to thank you for joining us for this historic launch. When the concept for the Climb podcast was first presented to me months ago, I was immediately captivated by the idea. It was compelling for a number of reasons, but chiefly among them because it was going to be telling extraordinary stories of young people across Africa and young Africans in the diaspora. These young people in their teens, 20s, and 30s have summoned immense courage to venture out into the world to proffer solutions to some of the greatest challenges facing our continent and indeed the world. So this got me thinking about my own life and where I'd been during my teens, the 20s and the 30s. It took me down memory lane to reminisce about the great promise and the limitless opportunities that come with being a youth. Great promise and opportunities that can result in the most extraordinary things if harnessed properly. And as a teenager, I had just finished secondary school when I started to tap into this great promise of youth and began exploring the limitless opportunities that come with it. And while waiting to get into university, I had an announcement on the radio inviting people to come for an audition for a radio drama in one of the regions. At that time, I was looking for ways to generate funds for my higher education. And so as an exuberant youth, I summoned the courage to attend the audition. And it was a resounding success, if I say so. So much so that I was employed as a presenter for the radio station, something I share in common with Professor Tim Allen. And of course, BBC was in the works at that time as something that I always, a station that I always go to. So that exuberance, the youthful adventure marked the start of a career that will come to define my life. A career in broadcasting spanning more than 4.5 decades and still counting. Even as a young broadcaster, working my way up the career ladder from my first job as a radio presenter through to my time with the Voice of Nigeria, the external service of the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, and right up to my 10 years with the Nigerian Television Authority, which was a public broadcaster in Nigeria. I knew that there was still more to be done, and I was very restless, so I was determined to do more. At that young age, I had a vision to transform broadcasting in Nigeria and create something truly special that would go beyond Nigeria and revolutionize broadcasting in Africa. Well, many sneered at me. A lot of them scorned me. Many laughed at me. Others thought I was crazy because it was not anything that anybody would want to think about news. But alas, as I say, that promise, courage, and limitless opportunities that comes with youth kicked in again. And that was how I felt my stable employment. I left my stable employment and a blossoming career in broadcasting to venture into the murky and unknown world of media entrepreneurship. Today, almost 30 years later, as they say, that's after founding Channels, the rest is history. Out of that youthful vision and audacity, Channels Television was born. And just as I envisaged, the station has consistently set the pace for broadcasting across Nigeria and indeed Africa for almost 3 decades. In the past 20 years, Channels has been crowned 15 times as Nigeria's best television station of the year, twice as Africa's best TV station. It wasn't easy. Indeed, there were immense challenges along the way, as we all know what entrepreneurship is, and I'm sure Firoz Laoji will more than let us know about such challenges. There were failures and there were triumphs, and there were many difficulties too, including financial uncertainty. but the dream stayed alive, and with God on our side, my youth propelled me to achieve what is today Africa's most awarded television station. The world that we live in today and faces more significant challenges than the one I grew up in. So much more than ever, we need that youthful energy, the ingenuity, the courage, the passion to face up to the profound challenges that we face and to proffer creative solutions to them. Here lies the significance of this podcast that we are launching today. Through the stories that will be told in this podcast, we will be celebrating those young Africans at home and in the diaspora who have summoned up courage to take up these challenges. By telling their stories, we'll also be inspiring legions of other young Africans to take up the mantle and to tap into their own creativity and ingenuity. And with over 70% of its population under the age of 30, Africa has the youngest people anywhere on earth. Well, for far too long, the youth bulge has not been well represented in the continent's governance structure and in corporate society, as well as in media and many other aspects of society. The time for a change is long overdue. And with today's launch, we mark a milestone in that change. Today, the youths of Africa face unprecedented challenges, from massive brain drain across the continent to growing cases of drug abuse, internet scams, denting the continent's image, to growing violence. We're set to change that with climate. As Africans, we risk losing the very people who hold the key to unlock our prosperous future, the youths. I believe the time has come to turn this negative tide and give the youths their rightful place, which is at the driving seat of Africa's growth and development. I'm extremely delighted with this podcast production because we're now playing our role and doing a bit in the renaissance of Africa's youth voices. The Channels Media Group is a product of this youthful passion and ingenuity, and we're celebrating here today, So I'm immensely proud that in the coming year, we're going to be collaborating with Firoz Lalji Institute of Africa and the London School of Economics and Political Science, a leading global institution dedicated to training young minds to give the youths of Africa a platform for their unique voices and a well-deserved seat at the table. It is our hope that this podcast will be a catalyst for positive change in Africa, and that it will inspire the youth of the continent to take up the mantle and create a better future for themselves and for the continent. Thank you very much.
Melissa, may I have a word?
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Mr. Momoh, I love your passion, and this is going to be a game changer for Africa, and I thank you for your leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The feeling is mutual. Firoz, read about you. Incredibly excited about your success. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's almost as if I should leave the call and let you to have the time. But thank you so much, Dr. John Momoh. Thank you, Sir Firoz Lalji. This is really a historic, the first of its kind youth-centered podcast today. Remember, I asked you to keep in mind the themes: youth leadership, innovation, development, Africans in diaspora engaging with the continent. But I also asked you to think about how to give more Africans access, because in some ways, many people think of some of the challenges that Africa faces. So how do we get the voices, this dream, how do we keep this dream alive? The Climb podcast, maybe Joel or Simon, you can help with regards to some of the digital technology challenges that we face today. Joel?
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We can.
Yeah, so if I got your question correctly, you were asking about some of the challenges that youth face or the podcasting space faces?
Yes, podcasting spaces and, giving them more access to.
Yes, so my response would be going back to what you said earlier about access to internet. Now, indeed, many persons hear of a podcast and they automatically think about the fact that it is primarily accessed via the internet. That is true, but unlike other media forms, the podcast is a much lighter version of the internet. So you do not need so much internet connection to be able to download a podcast. So with very limited or with very minimal data connection, you can download a podcast, have it on your phone or your devices, and use it and listen to it whenever you want to. So unlike other media forms where you have to be able to be online to get it, for a podcast, you can download it and have it on your phone whenever you want to listen to it. It's on demand. So that is the uniqueness about a podcast. And interestingly as well, a podcast can be transferred via two cell phones or two computers, just the way you can transfer a music file. So that is something that's also very, very groundbreaking, and it can be used in areas where there is no internet access. So I think generally, it is a very effective method for passing information across young people and across persons in areas where you might not have great internet access. And that is why I believe in its potential. Thank you.
Thank you, Joel. Simon, would you like to add something?
Yes. So I'll just speak a bit about an aspect which you mentioned, which is like, how do we get these voices in? And I think the keynote address touched on that. There are millions of stories to be told. In all honesty, we are already thinking about how we can ensure that we tell as many of these stories as possible. And part of the approach to this is that it's going to be driven by the young people themselves. So we start by identifying these people, Joel and the team going out to look for people. And as the keynote said, we expect that, we keep throwing it open for people to make recommendations. So if you know a great African story that is supposed to be told, a young person doing exceptional things or that has, done exceptionally well, you recommend. So we'll be tapping into that recommendation, and we have no worries about getting these stories told. As Joel hinted, these stories can be told virtually, it can be told physically, and so we are set up to get all that story. So wherever people are and they have the story to tell, we'll ensure we get that story.
Thank you, Simon. We are wrapping up in just a couple of minutes. This is now time. If you would like to say anything that you think hasn't been said for all those who have joined in, if you have a comment or two, you can have your say now. Otherwise, Tosin Adebisi, you have the floor. He's the Senior Program Manager with Firoz Lalji, and also London School of Economics and PFAL.
DFL, yes, well done. Excellent. I'm just going to keep this short. Just wanted to say again, thank you to everybody. Simon especially for saying ever calm. I don't, you've not seen me on my every day. My colleagues will disagree. But I wanted to thank you all, colleagues at Channels. It's great to see this initiative. I also want to thank my colleagues at FLIA who have given time to support this. Our institute manager, Martha, who is currently on the call, without which this would not have happened. Again, this is about leadership and leaders who just buy into an idea the way John Momoh bought into this from the very beginning. It's the same way Tim and Martha bought into this. And also colleagues that I work with, all of you who I can't name, who are on the call. This has been a fascinating journey. We're excited for this. For me, I'm the manager for PFL, which is Program for African Leadership. And PFL is an extracurricular activity at LSE. It is actually very unique. It's the only one of its kind in the UK, designed exclusively for African students, postgrad students. who come here to connect, to collaborate, and to inspire them for leadership at home, on the continent, and in the diaspora. It was actually one of the earliest programs for the Institute, of course, at the early start when Firoz endowed the Institute. And he's been with us, Firoz has been with us all the way. He still comes to our events, he comes to our activities, he loves meeting the students. He can't stop talking to them for hours. So, this is why this podcast is really unique. For me, I see it's not just cross-border, it's not just cross-sector, it's also cross-generational. And I think the most important part is that cross-generational, because I still like to call myself a youth, but you can see the gray. I think we all have a role to play in helping create that. And I think one of the things that makes this podcast really unique is that we're also going to be featuring 2 episodes, one with Firoz and one with John, where young people can also hear from them, their journey. Sometimes we see success as, oh, that's how they did it, but we don't always know the story behind it. And by sharing this in a story format, we hope to be able to, make failure something that people don't give up on, help young people to look not just upward for mentoring, but to look among their peers. And we know what they're doing. They're changing the narrative, they're creating solutions. And for us at P4, what we realized is that we are doing a lot at LSE, but we can amplify the amazing leaders we already have through this collaboration. So we're very excited about this. And I'm particularly happy that the co-host is a PFL alum. She graduated last year at Jidatu. So she will be co-hosting with Jewel. So this has a lot of potential to make impact, to inspire, and hopefully to get young people engaged. And I think we need stories of that nature now more than ever. Thank you so much, everybody.
You're indeed right. Also Africans telling their stories. Thank you so much, Tosin DBC, Senior Program Manager, for FLIA LSC. As to the grey you talked about, I'm sure Mr. Tony Ranta will tell you that he is still quite young, despite what you see there. I'd like to thank everyone, especially Sir Firoz Lalji. You've had a cold, but you've been able to bear that to stay with us. Thank you so much for joining us, patron, Firoz Lalji Institute for Africa. Thank you. And also Dr. John Momoh, thank you so much for joining us. Congratulations to you and the London School of Economics. And of course, Firoz Lalji Institute, congratulations. The Vice Chairman is also with us. Thank you, ma'am, for joining us. Chido Cleopatra Pemba, African Youth Envoy, Union Youth Envoy, thank you again. Of course, thank you, Joel. Kajidautu, thank you as well. Simon Ajembi, Head Digital Channels Television, thank you. I'm not forgetting Professor Tim Allen and of course our very keynote speaker, Professor Martin Spinelli. Thank you so much and congratulations to all of you on this project. Thank you again. So I think that on that note, thanks so much. Simon?
I'd like to just thank everyone for making this success, not just the podcast, but the launch event. We've had insights and stories that we hope to expand on from Dr. John Momoh, Martin Spinelli, and Mr. Firoz Lalji. So we appreciate your attendance of this event, and we look forward to sharing the great reports and statistics about how this podcast has performed and new stories and exciting story with you. So thank you all for honoring our invite and for being here. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Simon.
Sorry, Millicent, if I might mention this, the Vice Chairman Channels Media Group, Dr. Shola Momoh, was raising her hand.
Oh, how could I have missed that? I do not want to be out of the job.
Okay, I think does appear she's left. All right.
Okay. I do apologize.
Okay, I just say goodbye to everybody. I think you're keeping everyone waiting.
Thank you.
All right, then, everyone. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
everyone.
Goodbye to all.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Girls, I'll get in touch with you somehow.
Yeah, hope to meet you one of these
And
days.
that present, the keynote was spectacular. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Mr. Momoh.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.